Welcome to High Performance Hockey Podcast. Today we're joined by Assistant Director of Olympic Strength and Conditioning at the University of Wisconsin, Paul Valukas. Paul joined the Wisconsin Olympic Strength and Conditioning staff in 2021 as an Assistant Strength and Conditioning Coach. He currently oversees the Badgers women's hockey program. He was elevated to the position of Assistant Director of Olympic Strength and Conditioning in the fall of 2022. His new role, Paul will serve as the Olympic Strength and Conditioning Department's liaison with campus academic programs, student educational organizations, and will additionally serve as the Strength and Conditioning Department's lead for performance technology at the Cole Center. Paul joined the Badgers after most recently serving as the head strength and conditioning coach in the Ontario reign of the American Hockey League. Working with the LA Kings strength and conditioning staff, Paul created and implemented the reins off-ice strength and conditioning programming, return to play protocols, and rehab programs for injured players. A really fantastic conversation that we're able to have with Paul. We talk about the day in the life of Wisconsin Badgers strength and conditioning staff, specifically for ice hockey, KPIs he uses for his programming, how he buckets his programs, and the current landscape of strength and conditioning for college hockey. It's a fantastic conversation. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Paul. Thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely, man. Really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, really looking forward to it. We've got I know several colleagues that obviously have worked with you in the past. They speak very, very highly of you, and I have spoken off air several times. Always enjoy learning from you. We will grab a beer next time you're in Columbus, Ohio. I promise that. But really excited to share your experience with the listeners. You've got a diverse background in the sport of hockey, and I want to get right into it. University of Wisconsin, recently promoted as an assistant director of Olympic strength and conditioning. What is that job responsibility and what's a typical day look like for you?
Yeah. I'll start typical day and then kind of dive into the responsibilities. Typical day, I come in, primarily my sport is women's hockey. I also oversee men's tennis, but within my realm of the Cole Center, that's where the hockeys are basically in-house. So my typical day, I get in, I meet with Steph, our athletic trainer. She is kind of the point contact person for all of our athletes when they're not in the rink. So I check in with her daily just to see, hey, what needs to be modified? Where are we at on our rehab lifts? When are the upcoming medical appointments in terms of rehabs and whatnot, if we have athletes going through that process. Then I'll step into the gym. I'll kind of look at our programming for that day. I'm a firm believer that everything we write in the gym has to be kind of in dry erase, not physically, but if your athletes are absolutely fried and you've got a max strength day written, one way or another, it's not the best idea, right? So you got to make those modifications based on what you're seeing and what context you are in the season. That I try to always touch base with our interns. We're lucky at Wisconsin. We might have anywhere from 2 to 5 interns per semester. And so
that's fantastic.
It's great.
That's fantastic.
It's a fantastic kind of group of people, and we're lucky. Now we'll touch on, I guess, our job responsibility. One of my jobs, since I was an undergrad here when I had hair years ago, my job is to basically be the campus liaison. And so I'll speak to classes once a semester and basically kind of introduce strength and conditioning to your pre-kinesiology students, your rehab psych students, so they can understand that there is that realm and that opportunity is at Wisconsin. So of our 5 interns that we have right now, 3 of them are undergrad, and then 2 of them are master's students. So it's nice because we can kind of give these kids, I'll say kids, I'm only 31, but yeah, they're 19 and 18, an opportunity to intern for 2 to 3 years while they're in school. So they can get that opportunity to grow as coaches. So I try to meet with them at least once a day. It could be as impromptu as, hey, interns and assistants, what do we have? What questions do we have? Just kind of leave it open-ended. And I think one of the reasons I try to do that is I'm lucky enough to have had some really incredible mentors, people that without I would not be in this position. And they gave me that opportunity to learn from them. I certainly badgered them quite a bit, but I try to keep I try to give the interns that same experience of teaching them a little bit, a little bit here and there, asking them, hey, what do you want to get touches on? Whether that be the force plates, the 1080s, you know, hey, can I coach a warm up today? Can I write a warm up and can I talk with you about it? Any of those things. And then circling back around to the daily responsibilities after that, we'll usually have a lift right around
Yep.
midday for women's hockey.
Okay.
We'll have 2 mandatory lifts in season, but I like to keep the gym open on the other days that they're not training as a team. Primarily because I want each of our athletes to drive the boat on their own career. So if we're open if the gym's open, we get on the ice at 12 or 1:15, I'll keep it open from 12 to 1. And the athlete comes in and says, hey, I want to do an extra lift. I said, okay, what do you want to work on today? Well, I don't know. Well, tell me what you need. Like, cause I can program whatever. And obviously we have our mandatory programs, and that's always driven by, everything we know with our annual plan. But like, these athletes know their body better than I ever will. So if they're on the ice and they're saying, Paulie, I don't feel great on the back end of a shift, what can we do? Well, that gives me a little bit of insight into what's going on under the hood. And it doesn't have to be, it's not 10 sets of 10. We're not hitting German volume training on a Tuesday, but like maybe it's 2 sets of 5 on a dumbbell row, a little shoulder corrective and a hip corrective. So it's a 15-minute lift, but now we're over the course of 40 weeks, we've now gotten 40 extra lifts in. And now we're going into a sophomore or junior year with a little bit more training under our belt. After that, I'll try and make my way out to practice. If I don't stay for the whole practice, I'll stay for at least half. Number one, I like to just see what the practice is like on the day to day.
Yep.
I check in with the coaches as well. I'll say, hey, this is what we're doing in the gym. What's practice going to be like? If practice is going to be a lot of up and down, I might, make sure the warm up has a little bit more hip corrective work in it. If it's going to be fast, I want to make sure the lift is fast as well. We're not doing a high volume day on a day when they're supposed to be going up and down, going fast. And then if we do have any rehab lifts, we try to get them in during that practice time. And then after that, I'll check in with Steph before I head out to see if there's anything that's coming up for that next day, anyone getting off the ice for practice or anything that we need to work on. And then that's my day.
Got a couple
Yeah.
notes here because I like some of these things. First of all, I like this idea of whiteboard workouts. I understand, obviously, you have a plan A, but great coaches that have built enough time and hours under their belts understand that there's always a 1A and a 1B. You try to
Mhm.
keep it to 1A as close as possible, but you might have to whiteboard a couple of things here and there. I can tell you from my experience, then I'm going to ask you your experience. How do you go about changing those? I can tell you early in my career, it was all about being objective, trying to have modified Borg scales, vertical jumps, etc. Now for us, with the volume of athletes that we train, my mentor, Dan Pfaff, calls them bell cows, right? Who are my 3 to 5 leaders in the team? Who are the
Yep.
guys or girls that are always going to tell me not how they feel so much, but how the team is feeling? And then I modify from there. So my question to you is, how do you modify? Maybe it's the same, maybe it's different in your environment.
I take it right from there.
Yep.
I learned maybe the hard way. My first year in Ontario, I came in, I think it was 26, maybe 27. And I was like, oh, I'm going to teach these guys about pro hockey. You're not, right? What am I going to tell a 35-year-old who's played 12 years about pro hockey? Nothing.
Yep.
I'm not teaching them
Yep.
anything.
Yep.
So I learned very quickly to lean on the captains
Sure.
and get a feel for what do guys need? Where are we at?
Yep.
Because we can do jumps and we can do we can do all the objective tests like you brought up, but everyone's going to be a little different. So now that I'm here, there are about 3 people that I trust wholeheartedly to give me a good
Yep.
idea what the room's like. It's never a freshman. It's
Sure.
never ever a freshman. We're lucky. We've got a 5th-year senior who's a captain who, I mean, she is the epitome of a great leader. So if I ask her, hey, where's the team at? And she'll give me an honest answer. And it's either, hey, we're good to go. We're fine. Or it's, hey, this is where we're at. So I'm lucky to have some very good leaders within that room that I can lean on and ask. But yeah, definitely learned that the hard way my first year pro.
Second thing I wanted to piggyback on, you said, yeah, anywhere from 5 to 7 interns at a time. That's
Mhm.
outstanding.
Yes.
Uh, you know, uh, it's always great to have the best idea or the best written ideas on paper, but can you quote unquote pull those off? Resources such as qualified interns are huge. For
Mhm.
us, for example, in the summers, we had three really really good interns. Nate allowed us everything from technology procurement to be able to kind of run the testing with the training and training with the testing. You scale that back in the private sector to just myself and another coach on the floor, and it changes the way you're able to navigate in the terrain
Yeah.
and do what you want, whether it's training as testing, testing as training, et cetera. My question is, I'm guessing you utilize those resources to build efficiency in your programming, whether it's collecting KPIs and using them as an extension of the team. Am I accurate?
100%. And we've been really lucky. So this is my third season at Wisconsin.
Okay.
And one of my goals when we came in was to make sure that we had a steady stream of interns coming in
Sure.
and keeping them on for more than that semester. Because
Yep.
obviously when you're in season or you're running your private group in the summer, like you're going. And so you don't have that time to say, okay, maybe I need 30 to 40 minutes to teach an intern how to set everything up or whatever, like whatever that timeline is. But we wanted to say, okay, how do we keep people on for not just a semester, but maybe a year and a half? And so we tried to find first two grad students that were coming in who had interest in strength conditioning that were going to be with us for 2 years, and they became sort of our proxy captains of our interns.
Sure.
So we would teach obviously the whole intern group, but then those two interns who are now one's in Minnesota at a private high school, the other one's now at Stanford. Basically, we would show them everything we wanted to do, and then they would teach each intern class coming through. And then
That's
that
great.
way we would have myself on the floor, we'd have those two assistants, and then we'd have maybe a first semester intern being able to run the force plates. And then that intern could learn about the force plates, they'd get to know the athletes, and then they're going to say, okay, now they get to be on the floor. Now they're not just observing, now they're actually getting to know the athletes. The athletes are seeing that they're there. And then as those two, captain interns, your grad assistants basically have left, we've been able to reload through that graduate program to now re-up those. So now we have another two just like that. And since those guys came in, they're learning under interns or assistants really that we trust. They're kind of coming in, hitting the ground running.
Big time.
So always just reloading, reloading, reloading. So there should never be. Our goal was there was never going to be a semester that hit where we had completely new people, right? We never had to start from zero. We could always say, okay, yeah, like our jobs as head coaches and in this field is to, interns do this for free. It's not the greatest thing. It's not the best thing, but unfortunately, this is the nature of the beast. So our job is to make sure we find these people jobs. And if they're in every single day, they're working their tails off, they're doing what they have to do, then it's on us, right? It's okay, we got to go through our professional network. Hey, how do I get this person? How do I find the person that job? Because it's not easy. And once they leave, then we get to just reload. And so just being able to produce that, constant flow of good coaches is what we've tried to build here.
I think that's
Went off on a
smart.
tangent. I apologize.
No, I think it's smart. I think you keep them for a longer period of time too. You get to see progressions, regressions. What's the difference in the contrast between the in-season and off-season development,
Mhm.
management? You get to see a fuller picture of the landscape. The other thing, really, just a comment, not a question, but you talked about the players that want a little extra work and what do they feel they need, and no one knows their bodies like they do. And that to
Mhm.
me is just true wisdom because at the end of the day, nobody does know their bodies better. And I remember a long time ago, it was an old podcast I was listening to, and Matt Jordan was interviewed, and he said, it's a really unique profession that we're all in. He said, many, many times, the perception of the program may be more important than the program itself. If you're an athlete has a cooperative approach and they believe in the end product of what they're doing,
Mhm.
you can have a pretty shitty program and you can get awesome results. Now,
Of
now,
course.
now, take that a really good program, couple that with a belief in the system, then you got a really, really dangerous result in a good way.
Right.
The first question I always talk to, when young interns come into us, the first question they say, well, with your pros, the first question I ask, what's worked for you in the past? What do you like? What do you believe in?
Yep.
Obviously, there's never been a time, knock on wood, where there's such a philosophical dichotomy or dissection. We're like, well, we can't do that. No, we'll add that in. That's a great idea. Allow that belief to flourish and interweave in the program, I think is true wisdom. So good on
I
you.
I love that, and I say, I ask the players because, like, hey, what do you, just like you do, what do you like to do? Because also, like, there are coaches out there that, you can learn anything from every other coach,
Sure.
right? And like we talk about, stealing things from coaches. Like, if there's an athlete that's worked with a coach for 4 or 5 years, hey, what's worked? Oh,
Sure.
okay. So that coach has gotten to see that athlete grow and advance. So now I can take a page out of their book and say, okay, well, why is that working? What about that's worked? If I just come in and go, that's stupid, that's bad, that's dumb. Well,
Sure.
now I've created a dichotomy of this guy's,
Yep.
I have to choose between my coaches, and that's not going to work,
Sure.
right? It's not going to work at all.
Already starting off on a bad foot in that case. Quick
Hmm.
question to follow up, and again, it may or may not be the case at Wisconsin, but talk to Matt Shaw at Denver, talk to Burjesh Patel, Quinnipiac. Is there an overarching high performance model at Wisconsin? If so, what does it look like? If not, is it more based on the team that is being worked on or worked with?
I think it's based more on the team. I wish we did.
Okay.
I think there's a drive here to do it, but right now it's not there.
Okay.
We have it within, I think it's within your little bubbles of teams. You can either have it or you don't.
Sure.
I think I'm very lucky to work with some really high quality practitioners within the women's hockey realm,
Sure.
and men's hockey when I was there. But on the women's side, we have, to me, one of the best ATs in the country with Steph Art. We have a fantastic physical therapist who works with us and a fantastic dietitian. So within our little realm of 4 people,
Yep.
it's a pretty small high performance department, so to speak. But like, at least we have the opportunity to say, okay, what can we do with the 4 of us and with
Sure.
our interns and everyone else, kind of bring them in. It's hard, I think, at Wisconsin. It's such a large school. You've got your 6 priority sports with football, the basketballs, volleyball, and the hockeys. Everybody's got a different strength coach now. Everyone's got different ATs, and you've got different administrators overseeing it. On top of that, you have different budgets. So
Sure.
there's no direct high performance director or like an overarching, driving down message. I think they're trying to work towards it, but it is more sport specific of what do you want to create? Is it in women's hockey? No one said, hey, you have to interact with the athletic trainer. We decided right away when I met her, it was like, hey, I want you in the weight room. And she was like, you can come in the AT room, because the more you know about what I'm doing, the better you can treat in the AT room. And the more that I know what you're doing in there, the more I can build off it. When
Sure.
our dietitian got hired, I told her the same thing. I mean, she's fantastic. She's come to almost every lift, and she'll sit and she'll watch the force plates run, or she'll come and watch practice, not because she needs to know force plate data, but because she wants to see what we're doing. And if she's on the floor, if she's there, girls are more likely to come talk to her. Like, they're more likely to come have a conversation with her. When we have athletes who are doing rehab programs, I'll come in and watch the rehab with our physical therapist, and we'll talk through that next phase of training. Because again, if we're just siloed off, and Paulie is doing this in the gym, and Jill's doing this for PT, and Steph's doing this for AT, and Grace is doing this for, nutrition, and none of us are talking, well, now we're just kind of shooting shots in the dark, as opposed to, hey, we're all going to be in for one goal, which is having the athlete have the best experience possible, giving them the best tools for them to succeed, and basically making sure that they're having the career they want to have. It's not about what we want. It's about what that athlete wants to accomplish, right? If the athlete says, hey, I want to have 4 successful years here, and then I want to go be an aerospace engineer, great. We have 4 years to give them development over time. If they say, hey, I want to be the best women's hockey player imaginable, and I want to hit that stride when I'm 26, well, okay, that means that our development program has now gone from a 4-year plan to a 6-year plan. And we have to then take into consideration USA or Canada camps or whatever it is. So I think, long-winded way of saying, right now, it's very sport specific. It's very much bubbled into what women's hockey, what men's hockey, men's tennis, men's basketball, football are going to do. And then within those realms, you can see high performance, or you can see a more traditional collegiate setting. It's
Sure.
very coach specific.
Sure. That makes sense. You mentioned the opportunity. You've had the opportunity to train both the men's and women's teams at Wisconsin with much success. By the way, recent national champion with the women's teams. What are the difference, if any, in training male versus female? Contrast. Are there any differences? Same coaching style, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think right away, the two things that stand out are, when I was on the men's side, you had a large discrepancy between maybe the biggest athlete and the smallest, right? We had guys on the men's side who were 6'5", 225, which is a very big hockey player,
Sure.
to 5'7", 160,
Yep.
with quarters in his pocket. It's a huge, huge discrepancy. And so you're having to look at the biomechanical differences and saying, okay, like, you know, obviously we have our strength metrics and whatnot. But kind of going back to that whole whiteboard thing, like, yes, you want to have your metrics of, okay, can they do a lower body squatting exercise and hit certain numbers? Can they deadlift a certain amount of numbers? But in the end, you have to create the exercise to fit the athlete. And so for the men's side, I was very adamant on, like, if we're gonna deadlift, we're hex deadlifting, like, I'm okay with elevating a deadlift for a 6'5" athlete because they're not power lifters. Yeah, like, sure, the full range motion, all great. If an athlete can't get down to the full range, quote unquote, then elevate the exercise to make that range fit them.
Sure.
So that was big on the men's side. From the women's side, I think the biggest difference I saw was the training age. So you see the biomechanical differences on the men's side, but for the most part, a lot of those athletes are coming in with a relatively large training base, whether that be from juniors or from your private high schools or whatever. The sport of hockey is getting to the point, I'm sure you can agree with, like, you're seeing athletes starting to train at a younger age. So they're coming in with maybe not 10 years of training under their belt, but at least 3. They can be somewhat understanding of the gym. On the women's side, we had a huge discrepancy between, we have that fifth year senior who, there's nothing in the gym she can't do. Nothing. I mean, she is an absolute machine in the weight room, machine on the ice. And then we had a walk-on goalie who came in once for some tempo bike sprints and had to get off after 2 reps and was like, "Hey, I can't keep going." So it's like the training age is,
Wow.
we're at a very different level. And so I think the biggest discrepancy was, okay, how do we have a program that is going to enhance the best qualities of our highest trained athletes while also not completely forgetting the athletes that need to learn the basics. That's where I started to try to bucket athletes. I know, that's one of the things I think I wrote about once, was just like creating those buckets of how to, get the best out of those athletes. And so we might have 2 or 3 programs going on at one time. The movements might be the same, but the loading parameters might be different. We try not to, I made the mistake once of having 2 completely different programs, right? Where, like, the exercises were completely off. And that just made for way too much of a
Logistical nightmare.
Oh my God, it was awful. It was absolutely awful.
You make that mistake once.
Oh
That's
yeah,
all,
one
and
time.
we've all made them.
It's you know what? I'll be honest with you. I made it twice. The
Yeah.
first time I made it,
First time shame. Second time shame on you, right?
it was bad. So this was in Ontario. My first year in LA was a lot of good learning experiences, and I was fired up, man. I went to Pricer and I said, Pricer, I've got the best program. I've got 3 things going on. I've got one for our veterans. I've got one for the guys that need to get a little stronger. And I got one for the development guys. He goes, just kind of looks at me, shakes his head, and he goes, let me know how that goes. And just walks away. There's nothing else. The end of the first day, I remember going back to him going, that didn't work at all. It was so bad. I had veterans going, am I doing this program or this program, this program? I'm like, oh my God, like I can't do it. So then, of course, I get here. My first year gets under my belt. We do, it's not a super successful year, but we were like, the weight room was good. We saw some good development. Second year, said, okay, I want to bucket them again. First phase, I'm doing one thing with the guys that need more power and speed development. Another thing with development guys. And I was like, I made the same mistake. How did I mess this up? How did I miss this again? Yeah,
Wow.
definitely a slow learner. I'll learn, but it takes me a little longer.
That's okay. That's okay. Some experience comes at the user's expense, and we've all made them, and I've made plenty of them. KPIs for hockey players. What are the difference between KPIs that you feel for hockey as opposed to
Mhm.
field-based sports?
I think the biggest one is, looking at like, so we'll use the force plates, and I think those are a great tool. The main metric I look on for force plates is average watts per kilo, and that's primarily because from skating, it's not just that short. It's not like sprinting where it's that peak output. There's a little bit longer of a stride, there's a longer force output, and so I think that primarily is maybe the biggest difference. I've never
Average
worked
watts per kilo, you said?
average watts per kilo.
And what
For
do you
sure.
do? What are you doing that on? Sorry, just educate
Those
me
are
on
on
that.
Hawkins plates. And this again, I'm a world class thief. I took this from Matt Price. This
Okay.
was his metric he used with the Kings. He was going average watts per kilo and looking at, okay, what is the, what's that standard? And if a guy's above it, they have the opportunity to be a high level skater. If they're below, now we know we need to up their power output. And so
Okay.
that was kind of the main metric I looked at.
Okay.
On top of that, it gives me an idea. If I can see that trend line going up or down, I can then look at, what's their weight doing? If weight's going up and power's going down, now we know we can assume that there's maybe a increase in adipose tissue. If weight's going up, power's going up, we can say, okay, more than likely, there's an increase in muscle mass. And so while we do have access to DEXA scans here at Wisconsin, we only do them 4 times a year. So I don't get to do it. It's not once a month where I get to see right away, hey, what's going on? So
Sure.
that's another way of just looking in, but long-winded way of saying, I think biggest metric is that between field-based and hockey, I think is your average, power output versus your peak.
Sure.
Because again, sprinting, I don't remember how long that impulse is, but it's very short.
Yeah.
And so, you're not going to see that much in skating. If someone has those really short, choppy strides, like they might not be going anywhere,
Sure. Today's episode has been brought to you by Physical Preparation for Ice Hockey, Biological Principles and Practical Solutions, and the Gain Go Grow Manual. This is a 2-part book series exploring training the intermediate and advanced level players. Book number 1 explores training the intermediate player. Chapters include long-term athletic development, considerations, speed training, power training, strength training, and program design. The Gain Go Grow Manual explores training the high-performance hockey player. Chapters include biomechanics of ice hockey, considerations for high performers, minimizing adaptational risks while upsizing gains, the Gain Go Grow model, and example microcycles. More information can be found at Amazon.com. It's interesting. I'm just making notes here as we write. I read the book Force by Dan Cleather. A really interesting book, and then he just talked about this idea of impulse, and he talked about measuring impulse and the 3 keys to that: peak force, average force, and rate of force development. And we've tried to be able to try to get those numbers with as little metabolic or physiological or neurological damage to the athlete during testing.
Mm-hmm.
We jump with Hawkins plates. Our metrics are just a little bit different. We also do the mid thigh pulls, and we try to measure that stuff once during the course of every block of training. So once every 4 weeks, and it's not always
Mm-hmm.
perfect. Like we talked
Right.
about this idea of having, how often do you use and how often do you measure? Do you try to make that measurement part of the training, or is it separate days? How do you do it, and how often maybe is the best
I try
question.
to jump them once a week at least.
Okay.
And then with that, if an athlete says, hey, I want to jump again, I didn't feel like I jumped well. Again, like we're not paying by the jump. So like if an athlete says, hey, I want to jump, like we'll put it in, we'll say our first block, let's say it's a hex deadlift, a lateral leap, a cable dead bug, and a dumbbell row. Okay. So when we're talking through, hey guys, sometime in that first block, you're going to place one of your A2 lateral leaps with a counter movement vertical jump, set of 3. Now, I always tell them, like, again, this is not a science, like, this isn't a perfect scientific measurement. So, like, I want you to get in the first block, but let's say there's a huge traffic jam. We have a new intern running the force plates and they're kind of struggling. Okay, all good. Hey, I want you to get your jump in sometime in that lift. And primarily I tell the athletes that, one, because I don't want them to think that anything's going wrong if they don't get that jump in that first block. It's not a black or white thing. You didn't do it wrong. You didn't do it right. I just want to see. 2, I don't want the intern to feel, if an intern comes in and wants to get touches on a force plate, I don't want them to get so nervous running the force plate that all of a sudden they start like panicking. Oh my goodness, I messed it up. It's junk data. There's no such thing as a strength and conditioning emergency. Like, yeah, do I like to see it? Absolutely. If you mess it up, can we fix it on the back end? Yeah, we can. You're going to get touches on it again.
It's really interesting that you brought this up. Patrick Ward and I spoke about this, like the difference between, research in terms and measures of journals and how to internal and external validity of setting the lab up, for lack of a better word, whether it's ordering
Mhm.
effects, whether it's the same time of day, and then you realize when you do this, the differences in the actual research component of what we do and the pragmatic application of what we do. Like we don't have the opportunity. We have 120 athletes coming in during our training camp. We don't have ordering effects. It's never going to always be the exact, or it's never going to be the exact time of day. Our
No.
isometric mid-thigh pull, if you look at the research on the Hawkins site, it would state that you use wraps. Guess what? Getting wraps on and off 120 kids. So we understand that going into it.
Mhm.
We understand
Yeah.
it's not going to be perfect, but that's the major, major difference. I think young coaches sometimes are quick to look at that research. I think it's great, by the way. It's awesome.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
understand that there's a world of academia and research. There's a world of the pragmatic application. Hopefully, we can overlap those so the Venn diagram overlaps, but it's not always going to be the case. It's
No.
not always going to be more often than not, it's not going to be the case.
Right.
And that's okay as long as you understand that going in.
Mhm. Yeah. 100%. Like, you have your confines of when you're going to test, right? So like rule of thumb is we're never testing an athlete after they get off the ice, right? We're calling that a wash. So if they missed a set of jumps, okay, it's a wash, right? No big deal. So like we have those confines where within that 45-minute lift, we got to get our jumps in. We know that it's not going to be perfect. Just like you said, it's not an academic research paper. You're not going to see me on the Journal of Strength and Conditioning saying, look at all the things I've proven, because it's a small snippet of maybe what's going on under the hood. And if we start to see trends going down in a wrong way, okay, now we get at least to see over the course of time, hey, what's going on? If there's one trend word downward, it's okay. Let me think about what's going on. We look at the context. And if it goes up the next week, great. But at least it just gives us a small snippet of what's going on for the athlete.
I think too. This is just me speaking out loud. I don't know if you agree with it or not. I wrote a blog about this, but I think a lot of times, specifically with plates, with objective data, not it's great. This is all objective information, but clouds aren't clocks and clocks aren't clouds. We operate in very complex environments, and this is just my opinion. I think it's naive to say, oh, well, we're picking apart and picking the pepper out of the fly, you know what, and we're going to fix the MRSI on somebody, and all of a sudden everything's going to change. It's now we're creating a more that guy or girl might have been testing just tired or fatigued. It could have been a long practice, a long game. There's so many different things and so many different confounders in our environments that are extremely complicated and complex, not complicated. And I
Mhm.
think we just need to know that going in. It's not one metric that's going to be the magic pill. We have to measure and manage these over time, see if there are negative trends, but it's never going to be the one, oh, we've got to fix this one little piece. You know, I've made that mistake by focusing on that and digging so deep, and then you just completely lose sight of the performance landscape and realize, like, does that A even matter? Or B, like, am I fixing the right thing? You can look at 52 different metrics on a Hawken Dynamics platform. I mean,
Yeah,
you can get lost in that.
100%. And I think, yeah, I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. As soon as we start looking at our athletes as if they're just like numbers, we're completely forgetting the fact that there's so much more going on, right? And if we say
Big
if
time.
we say, well, I made Anthony Donskoff's, force output go better or go up. Now he's going to be a better hockey player. Well, no, not necessarily. We have we
Sure.
have fixed one metric out of the entirety of his life,
Sure.
and that's gonna like we can't take credit for this one thing and say it's going to lead down this line for improvement. We're making a change, and that's great. And these are the things we can control. But if we start to say that if we change one metric, everything down that line is gonna improve. Well, one, I mean, we're kind of pumping our own tires in a place that doesn't actually make sense, right? If we're going to say that we can fix all these metrics, then if things go wrong, we have to then take some
Big time.
responsibility for that, right? Like I remember I was listening to actually your podcast talking about, injury prevention. Well, we don't prevent injuries, right? And if you're going to say you prevent injuries, well, then unfortunately you have to kind of own that. If you say this program is injury prevention, everything's going to be fixed. Well, if you're going to live and die by that sword, then you better be willing to live and die by that sword. So like we can't just stare at the metrics and feel like this is the end all be all. It is a small snippet of the athlete as a whole. And there are going to be things that we can't control. And there are going to be things that we have no say over. And, I think that goes back to the whiteboard programming of like the things we can control is the weight room. I can't control how tired you are from practice. Can't control how tired you are from traveling. I can't control your midterm schedule. I can't control if you're having family issues or you didn't sleep last night or you happen to, try a double shot of espresso for the first time at 11 p.m. I can't control that. What I can control is
Yep.
what I give you in the weight room.
Sure.
If I choose to not control the environment, and I choose to say, well, this is my program, and my program fixes, your, whatever. I'm here to make you stronger. I choose to just drive that home. Well, then if things don't go right, then I have to own that. If
Sure.
I don't change the environment that I have control over for the betterment of my athletes, then I'm in a bad spot.
Couldn't agree with you more. I want to slightly pivot here. SCAF article, 5 ways to bucket athletes to improve off-season development at the college level. I know we touched on it very briefly.
Mhm.
You mentioned your bucketing. So I want to ask a broad-based question. So why the need for buckets? You hit on it a little bit, but I want to ask
Mhm.
them. And then what are the buckets? And then I want to kind of feed off a couple questions regarding those buckets.
Yeah. I mean, so first off, why the need for buckets? I think you get a chance to put athletes in it, I know we kind of talked about not being, we're not able to fully look at every part of our athlete and say this, simplify them down, but at least we're now putting athletes in positions or in buckets, so to speak, where they're going to make improvements to their weaknesses.
Sure.
If we had, so when I wrote that article, I was on the men's side and the women's side, but we had a group of guys who were 5th-year seniors. They had lots of training. A lot of them had trained with Jim Snyder before me. And so really high quality training. They're
Sure.
like, there was nothing I could throw at these guys that they couldn't handle. And the idea of giving them more hypertrophy when they were already at a set, didn't need it seemed very silly. But at the same time, because of some of the athletes we brought in, we had this huge discrepancy where we had those guys, those 5th-year guys, and then we had freshmen who were coming in at 18 who, were just twigs. And I was like, okay, these guys need hypertrophy. They need hypertrophy. They need just the most meat and potatoes, Metallica, just red meat and barbed wire program. And these guys need something a little bit more fine-tuned, a little bit more, speed and power based. And so that was originally kind of what drove the idea of bucketing athletes. And I'd stolen that again. I think I stole everything from mentors and people much smarter than me, but I took that from Matt Price with how he looked at his guys in the Kings roster of your 18-year-old coming in to your 35-year-old NHL player. And so I said, okay, can I dumb that down for my 18 to 22-year-olds? And that was basically what I tried to do with bucketing the athlete. And then kind of go on the buckets I looked at, power outputs at watts per kilo. If an athlete was at a standard of like 32.5 watts per kilo, then I knew that their power output was pretty good. If it was below that, I knew, and they were, power output was low and the muscle mass was low, because that was another one. Muscle mass was another one that we looked at. I knew that I needed to improve muscle mass. I needed more contractile tissue to get them to that point. Then on top of that, I looked at, what else did I use? Boy, now I'm starting to forget a little bit.
I have these in front of me. I got chronological age,
Mm-hmm.
training age,
Yep.
force plate data, muscle mass, and your strength baselines.
Yes. Okay. It's all coming back to me now, Anthony.
That's okay. When you created these buckets, I know you had mentioned the fact before your time in the American League, spreading yourself with too many different programs. How did you compartmentalize within the program? For example, was it small little minor changes in these programs? I remember listening to a colleague of mine, probably a year and a half ago, all on essentially collecting KPIs over time and then looking at trends over time. And I remember the actual interventions after they collected all those were so small. And I think it's actually genius to me, right? Like I, I've written about this before in I call it targeted intervention. And the goal is not to do a complete facelift on something, right? If someone's got a power discrepancy, perhaps you're adding instead of a higher impulse jump, it's more of a stretch shortening cycle jump.
Right.
Instead of a heavy hang clean or a loaded jump, perhaps it's more of a snappy a dumbbell snatch, something where they're moving something quicker. Maybe it's an extra rep or two of sprints. Do you look at that with your quote unquote buckets, and how do you bucket within that team environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's spot on, right? And I think it goes back to like me learning slowly that too many different programs going on at one time just creates basically a chaos environment. And so it was, if the movement was a deadlift, right? And our group that was looking for more a tissue-based adaptation, right? We were going, you know, 8 sets of 5 on a 90-second clock. Boom, we're going. And they're doing their jumps in that maybe in the block before their deadlifts. And the group that's more power and speed based, they're hitting maybe 6 to 8 sets of 3 at a much lower intensity or much lower weight, excuse me. The intensity is higher. And we're doing almost like a pseudo French contrast. So the movements are the same, the loading parameters are slightly different. And we basically just looked at the weight room and split it up that way. So I had all the guys on their deadlift, they're all right across the racks, they're looking in the mirrors, they're doing all that. But I know that on the right hand side, I know that that area going down the first 4 racks, those guys are in their power and speed phase. So I know if I'm looking down and I've got you, Anthony, on this far right rack, and you're not moving very snappy, I know, okay, so something's up with that loading that we need to either make it lighter or heavier based on what your needs are. We know you're in the power and speed. Then I've got my other folks down here on this far left-hand rack. I know that they're going to be more in a tissue based. It's going to be more muscular. It was very minor tweaks once I learned that, I don't need 12 different programs going on. I don't need guys doing K boxes and another guy doing back squats. It can all be a split squat, but maybe my tissue-based group is doing a 3-second negative and my neuromuscular-based group is doing a 10-second ISO. I've got 3 sets of 12 on a 3-second negative and 3 sets of 1 with a 10-second ISO. Well, now the movement's no different. I'm coaching up the movement the same, but I can look at the sheet and say, hey, this is what we're doing over here, and this is what we're doing over here. That's how we kind of broke it up. I think too many variables within that program. One, you're not coaching it well because you're then as a coach going, holy smokes, what is that group doing over there? Or, because we're working with college athletes, at some point, our freshmen are going to follow our seniors, whether we want to or not. And so if I have a freshman who sees a senior doing completely different movement than what they're supposed to do, chances are they're going to go and follow that athlete because they're going to go, well, Anthony Donskoff's doing this lateral leap to vertical jump. Well, that's what I'm supposed to do because I got to follow him, even if his sheet says something completely different. So instead of saying, okay, let's do completely different movements across the board, I'll coach the movements the same, but the intensity, the intent, and the volume or the loading is going to be different. So I'm coaching it one way, like I'm telling the movement, but then I'm saying, okay, my power and speed group, you guys are working more intent, right? Your lateral leap is fast down and back or whatever the coaching cue might be, where my freshman and sophomore, hey, you're hitting a 1-second pause.
Sure.
So now that we're not coaching 12 different movements, saying, 8 movements with slightly different coaching cues.
I think it's really interesting. It's slightly different in how we do it, based on resources in the private sector. We train, we call the performance of excellence for our AAA organization. So that's essentially the U15s to U18s. And inevitably, right, like young coaches, what's good? And everyone wants to quick to pop off. But the reality is you don't know what's good unless you compare it with the actual team, right? You have to be able to collect that information. Now, there's always tails, right? The really skinny kid or the kid that's really overweight. But central tendency right in the middle, it's hard to decipher after unless you get some training under these kids and you're able to quote unquote test them. We call it training as testing. We're collecting information. What we do is after that 4 to 8 weeks is we'll have player reports and compare them against our team, right? So we'll have those radar charts and say maybe, hey, comparatively speaking to your power output, this is what we need to improve on. This is what we want to improve on. And we might add some small little variation within that existing program to hit those, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Now, if I had the resources, probably like you, and had 5 to 7 interns and was able to, the end results is exactly the same. It just takes us a little bit more time to figure those buckets out, if that makes sense.
100%.
You know,
100%.
but I do think it's really interesting, and the older I get in this profession, and I know you and I could agree on this, is that these targeted interventions do not need to be facelifts. They're small little. There's, I always say that we got an independent variable and a dependent variable. The dependent variable is the athlete's adaptation. The independent variable is our acute programming variables in every exercise. The more
Mhm.
crap that we have, the harder it is to tease out what worked and what didn't.
100%.
so,
100%. Like,
simple programs are beautiful in that aspect.
yeah. I mean, I think that you hit the nail right on the head. If I've had 12 different interventions going on at one time, well, then I don't know what worked. And I also
Sure,
don't know what didn't work.
sure.
Right. Like, and so, you know, it's fun to have super complex programs. It's fun to write them. Oh my goodness, I'm going to do force plates. I'm going to do K boxes. I'm going to have 1080 rolling. It's going to be sick. There's so much sports science going on. And then you go, boy, that was a really, really, really poorly run lift. I
Yeah.
had 12 different things going on at one time. I had 6 different interns trying to coach it up, and I don't know it worked.
I had a technology
But
problem. I was looking down at my. Yeah,
yeah.
we've all had those, right?
Mhm.
I'm completely with you.
Yeah.
Want to slightly pivot. I want to respect your time before we depart here. The current
All
state
good.
of strength and conditioning in college hockey. You've been in this game. You've been in it for a long time. What are the current challenges in the field at the NCAA level in the sport of hockey?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that I look at, I think that's coming up is hockey is a priority sport, right? It is, no, it's not a college basketball where you have the frozen or not the frozen for the final four and there's a multi-gazillion dollar budget. And it's not football, but it's if you look at college sports, it is the number three. And it has, college hockey, I think, has grown because of the NHL's, correct me if I'm wrong, you're working with more NHL players than I am, but like I think there's been a movement now to get guys into college and to actually use that as a development program for the NHL. So like you're dealing with professional athletes, or future professional athletes. And I think the biggest challenge is the fact that, put it bluntly, administration is not paying coaches is not and for what they need to be doing. It's not, they're saying, okay, well, you're a hockey strength coach. Well, we're going to pay you at the what the median cost of other strength coach. Well, I'm sorry, but like this is football's making $500,000, basketball is making three, and then your highest paid hockey strength coach is maybe making 90. Well, where's the discrepancy here, right?
Sure.
And so, and on top of that, you then say, okay, you're not just running hockey, you're going to run another sport, but you're also going to have to do the sports science, the nutrition, the travel, and everything else within that hockey environment. But then you also have to run the rehab lifts and the team lifts and watch practice and everything else. And so I think the current challenge is that you have basically one man or one woman bands for a team of 28 athletes or 50 if you oversee both men and women.
Well, you answered my second question, which was, are we spread too thin? And the answer is a resounding yes.
Mm-hmm.
Common practice versus best practice. Couple quick shots for you right here. And again, I want to bring this all back to NCAA hockey.
Yep.
Should coaches travel on the road? Interesting conversation I've had. I see it both ways. I personally am biased towards, and again, I'm not in this environment, so it's easy for me to sit here and be the armchair quarterback. I
Mm-hmm.
like the idea specifically if your coach is competent on the ice to be able to stay back with players that aren't playing, have therapy, but that's all different pending the background of that individual. What are
Right.
your thoughts? Should coaches travel on the road?
You know what, I'm gonna piggyback off you. I think it's dependent. I think
Okay.
if you don't have athletes staying back, I think it should be if you don't have athletes staying back and you want to travel, I think you should be I think it's okay to travel. I don't think it should be absolutely 100%. You have to be there. You have to run the warm up. You have to drink a cup of coffee and you have to sit and watch the game.
Yep.
Okay. If that's what you're doing, great. If you're traveling with enough people that you're running lifts on the road and doing your training lifts for the players that aren't playing, then yeah, there should be a coach running those lifts. But if those guys aren't traveling and they're staying back, then be with the players that need you. I like travel, but I don't have any kids. So it's not like and obviously I'm married and the travel schedule for college hockey is a lot easier than it was for pro. So if I'm gone for 2 days, it's okay. But, you know, there have been times when it's like if you leave 4 or 5 players back, well, it's not really fair to those players for them just to be sitting around, maybe going to, giving them a program and having them go to the student gym or having an intern run. It's like if you got 5 guys not traveling and 5 women, which we keep a pretty we're a pretty tight knit group on the women's side, so we don't actually ever have 5 players not playing. But you know, if you had 5 players not dressing, well, is it more beneficial for you to go back and train those 5 players and actually skate them and get an adaptation to get them ready to possibly play a game as
Sure.
opposed to running a warm up for 10 minutes?
Yep.
So, should coaches travel? I think maybe the better question is, you know, can they and should they be given the option of whether they need to or not? Right?
I like
Like,
that. Yeah.
I don't think it's 100% necessary for a coach to travel. I think there's benefits to it, but I also think there's benefits of them staying home, you know?
Should coaches receive bonuses for winning? I know some programs do, maybe some don't. If they do, great. Should it be a larger percentage? You just won a national championship. None of my business what the finances are there, but
Mhm.
should coaches because that is if you look at it and peel the curtains back, and I'm not trying to ask you a loaded question. If you don't feel comfortable answering it, don't answer it.
Mhm.
But the strength and conditioning staff, the performance staff, you would argue spends more time with the players than the actual head coach
Mhm.
when it comes down to training camp.
Right.
I got it, and I understand. By the way, I'm not suggesting that the head coach makes a comparable bonus to the strength coach. That's not what I mean.
I think
But
we could
should
make a
but
comparable bonus. I'll take one of those. Um, you know,
I, no, I'm curious how it works, and if it and again, it's none of my business what that is. But is that happening right now in the NCAA to your knowledge?
I think it is happening. I think it's very school dependent, and I think it depends on, like what the person did before. So like I was lucky that, Jim Snyder had been here for 20 years, and before that was Mike Potenza, and they had done an incredible job. You talk about legends, and even before that was Paul Goodman. Talk about 3 legends in the field of hockey strength conditioning. I stepped into their roles, and they had been, the school had kind of built up good, bonuses for them and good things for them, and Snides had really fought for the position, and so I was lucky that I kind of was the benefactor of his hard work. Should coaches receive bonuses for winning? Do they deserve to? 100%. Do I think it should be dependent only on wins and losses? No, because I don't think that's 100% fair metric for a strength coach. We can do all the things right in the weight room. We have no say over the X's and O's, right? If your power play isn't working, that's not really a metric of, off ice training. Maybe it's an off ice conditioning thing. Maybe I guess you could maybe make that argument, but like it's what we do is so non-contextual to the actual performance on the ice. I think it's hard to say 100%, you should only be tied to winning because I'm sure world-class strength coaches who are part of programs that don't win the national championship.
Sure.
So why do those coaches only get judged by the end all product of someone else? Right? That's not 100% fair for that strength coach. So do I think they should they receive bonuses? 100%. Does it have to be dependent on the national championship? No. Do I have a good answer for what it should be? Unfortunately, no. Now if you can see a trend line of when Anthony Donshoff took the job at University X, there was a significant decrease in non-contact soft tissue injuries. Should that get a bonus? 100%. 100%. If that also ties into more, wins, great. If you've cut the rehab time for a groin strain from, let's say, I'm just going to make numbers up, 8 weeks down to 2 weeks because your training program is dialed into loading parameters and everything, should that get a bonus? 100%. Because it's clear that when you step into a role, you've now started to layer in metrics that have actually, or practices that have helped the athlete as a whole.
Makes
But
sense. I think it's really important. If you know what you're going to get fired for, you better know what you're being objectively judged by, right?
100%.
And this could open a whole new can of worms as to what is the objective goal and the objective of the strength and conditioning coach? Is it wins and losses? Is it decreasing soft tissue injuries? Is it improving strength? Is it better communication with the athletes? I think they all play an important role, but to be able to objectify that is a massive struggle in our industry. And I
100%.
don't know because it's not, it's easy. Like I said, again, it's probably the second time I've said it in our conversation. It's easy for me in the private sector to talk about this kind of stuff, but I don't know how that works both in the National League and in NCAA. Like, do when you're sat down as a staff, here are your roles and objectives. Here's what you could be fired on. Here is how we're going to judge you. Here is what we're.
Mhm.
I don't know if that happens. I will say most of the coaches that I speak with, the answer is kind of like, nope. It's
Nope.
not. And it's. I think it's something that we as a staff in a cradle of coaches, hopefully we can come up with some sort of a solution. And I know it probably resides in others' hands, but at least what those objectives are, because it's a whole other can of worms that obviously we don't have time to dive into today. Masters, PhD, overpopulations of jobs. I've talked to this. This is the last one, by the way, with Kieran and Flat before. Now it's like everyone's got a master's degree. Everyone's getting a PhD. I go back to this book I constantly refer to, calling The Tyranny of Metrics. In one chapter, they talked about education in it. And they use a quote, I'm paraphrasing. It says, when you increase the number of winners, you decrease the value of winning. And right now, correct me if I'm wrong, like everybody's looking for a master's. Everyone, and the problem with that is, you got undergrads, PhDs, masters, and they're all competing essentially for the same salaries. And
It's
now
it,
it's like, okay, guess what? Your salary hasn't changed, but now we want a PhD or now we want a
mhm.
master's. Are you seeing that in NCAA as well?
Yes, 100%. I mean, we'll tell our interns. I mean, what other profession? And again, I'm not like, this isn't a new hot take. This is, I think, you've heard strength coaches say it across the board. I mean, what other job do you know where you need like 3 to 5 years experience, a master's degree just to get an entry level position and make 30 grand? I mean, come on, people. So 100% you're seeing it. I mean, we like, yeah, everyone on the Olympic staff has a master's degree. Everybody across the board. We have people on our staff who are already getting PhDs, and it's like, you know, with that, that's not going to up your salary. It's going to add more letters behind your name, but you're not upping your salary, And so it is crazy, and I don't know what needs to happen for that to change, because people aren't going to stop getting PhDs now that it's started. Like, and I won't lie to you, I even was like, should I get my PhD? And then I was like, well, I don't have anything to study. Like, you're not going to go into a PhD being like, I guess I'll figure it out. Like, I didn't have any idea what I wanted to study or what I wanted to do with it. I was just like, well, if you want to work in the NHL, you want to work in high performance sports, everyone's got a PhD. So I should maybe get a PhD. And it's like, and I'm almost embarrassed for saying it because it's the wrong way of looking at it. It's the wrong way of
Sure.
saying, okay, you get that next step so how it's going to help you. You do that PhD and you have your PhD. So hats off to you, brother. You do that with the intention of how you're going to apply it. You don't just spur of the moment think I'm going to get my PhD and see what happens. Like,
Yeah.
that's not what you do. So
Sure.
I don't know how we combat the oversaturation and the fact that, as you put it, if everyone's a winner, then it decreases the value of winning. And going back to what we said before, there's no objective measure of what makes a good strength coach or a non-good strength coach. I'm sure people who are in the highest echelon of sports who are making a ton of money who are not good strength coaches. And I'm sure people at the Division III level who have 10 different sports who you think are world-class coaches. One's making enough to, buy a speedboat. The other one's making barely more than someone working at Quick Trip, you know,
Sure.
but one is, what's an objective measure of that coach being good or not?
The other thing I see a lot, this is probably more in the NHL, and maybe it's just me again from an outside lens. I think I like this idea of teaching the performance professional the technology as opposed to having the technology person become a performance professional.
100%.
To me, it just, you have to have the context and you have to be able to speak the lingo and the language and be able to communicate with the hockey culture. I say for whatever that is, but every sport is so unique. I see that, and it's becoming more and more prevalent in multiple sports, but it's starting more and more in hockey as well.
Oh,
So
100%. I mean, I think like I laugh because I'm lucky to work for one of the best coaches to me in the world, and that's Mark Johnson on the women's side. I mean, the guy has won everything. You think Mark Johnson cares how much his girls back squat? No, he cares if they're in shape and they can handle practice and they're going to be able to recover. And we have to speak apples to apples. So like, if I tell him that someone, Anthony Donskoff can back squat 315, or if I have a sports scientist come in and start to throw metrics at him, he's going to go, why do I care? I
sure.
care about, are they ready to play hockey and serve, basically last a 40-game season and win the last game of the year. That's what we
Talk
care about.
talked to John Stevens last podcast, and he said, "How does it help the player? I don't.
Hmm.
You better be able to answer. How does it help the player?
Yep.
And you better be able to do that pretty quick.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You
There's
don't have a
not.
lot, you don't have a lot of time.
And you like again, Matt Price told me. He told me my first day in LA. He said, "There's two things general managers hate: kind of indifference, wishy-washy answers, and creative budgeting. Don't do either." And I was like, "Okay." So like, if you're gonna give an answer, it is
Roger
yes.
that.
Yeah, like, and you learn your first time sitting down with somebody who is making financial decisions based on your movements. You don't want to be like, oh, I think it's okay. I think it's all right. It's like, yes, it's going to help the player. Yes, it's going to improve on ice performance, or no, it's not. And
Sure.
if the answer is no, it's not, we're not doing it.
So well put. I like that from Pricer. He talked to me about that before. He talked about the academia. He said, Anthony, you can't answer something. It depends. No, you better have an answer. Now,
No.
you and I as colleagues can talk like that. But
Hmm.
what's next for you? Talk to me about your next steps, legacy. You've been coaching for a while. I know you're young, but
Hmm.
you've been doing it for a long time with a lot of great mentors. How do you want to be remembered as a coach?
I think this is actually one that I've thought about for a long time. I want, when I leave this profession, that, I mean, obviously, I want players and coaches and interns, especially, to look back and say that person, Paul Valukas cared about me as an individual. He set me up for success much more than just as an athlete. I think, when we get into those higher levels of sport, it's very easy to start to look at athletes from objective data. Oh, what are their jump numbers? How fast are they on the ice? What are their, what's their time on ice? How successful are they on the power play or the PK? And again, that's the field we're in. But there's so much more to these athletes than just those metrics. And if you start to look at those athletes just as metrics, you forget the fact that there are so much more to these people. And if we just look at interns as like, oh, this is an intern who wants to work in professional hockey and they're not good on the floor, but they're good with sports science. It's like, well, no, you have an opportunity to, really teach that kid or that young coach and give them the opportunity to, this is a fantastic field. It's a person first field. It's a person driven environment. And so when we forget the people aspect to it, I think we're losing a lot. And so my legacy hopefully is that when I hang them up and when I'm all done, that the athletes I worked with and the people I work with, would say something like, great coach, but a better person, you know?
Our guest today has been Paul Valukas. Paul, thanks so much for joining us.
It was an honor to be on it, man. I really appreciate the time.